Good afternoon. In the meantime this week, we're going to try to take some exegesis, the reading out of material from last Sunday's sermon, and bring to you what an old seminary professor called as our exegetical underwear. Now, I've learned in 21 years of preaching that when a complicated idea arises, the best strategy is not to take it head on or to avoid it, as is all too common, but to get playful and have fun with it. Last Sunday's sermon on the 18th, focused on the poorly understood and underappreciated idea of grace. I refuse to call it a doctrine. I framed it in a fun setting of Alice in Wonderland. Talking portraits on the wall represented some of the key church figures who have formed or deformed the church along their understandings of God's unmerited favor towards us that we call grace. This article is some of the 9 pages that I developed from over 100 pages of study for the sermon. This Cliff Notes version is as much exegetical underwear as I dare expose, lest I suffer the fate of Jan Hus, who was burned at the stake in 1415 for heresy, but more likely because he pointed out the moral failings of priests, bishops, and the Pope from the pulpit. Maybe not a good idea. The idea of grace as the unmerited gift from God in mercy and forgiveness towards us appears in both the Hebrew Bible and the Christian scriptures. The evolution of the Greek word from its Proto-Indo-European roots can tell us a lot about what they meant back then and what they were thinking. Speakers of any language may not know the exact etymology or history of meaning of a given word, but how a word is used often carries with it the nuances and understandings from its original roots. The Greek word for grace, the noun form, is charis, or charis with an X, for example. In antiquity, during the golden era of philosophy in 500 BC, charis was a greeting to the gods, although it was not specifically religious. Later, the term would come to mean a secular ruler's favor towards his or her subjects. Charis was also the gift from an older male sponsor to their younger male intimate who was being paid to go through the Greek schooling system, Mark Antony being most famous among those young men. It is delight in the beauty of something, a favor or gift received, or that which pleases. In Jewish and early Christian thought, charis becomes a giving of thanks to God. One Episcopal theologian summed it up nicely, saying that grace is the opposite of karma, which is getting what you deserve, but grace is in fact getting what you don't deserve. The root of charis in the Indo-European family of ancient languages is ger, meaning to want or desire. The word predates charis by at least 2,000 years. Charis and its root appear in lots of modern words such as Eucharist, charisma, whore, carol, choir, chorus, cohort, court, and others, but probably not charity or its Latin antecedent, caritas. There are also connected roots in ergo, energy or labor, and Gaia, earth. It is also very likely all 3 roots came from a much earlier root connected to the earliest days of farming and building enclosures. The joy of or happiness that is in the original Greek charis may have to do with enclosing the land, farming it, and then being connected to one's fellow villagers. I sometimes turn to a scholarly site to understand biblical words. Abarim Publications is one of my favorites. And here's what they said about the verb form of charis, or being joyful. Quote, being joyful has nothing to do with quietly gloating or feeling in any particular way, but having a secure shelter and being surrounded by and connected to a whole bunch of equally secure other people. Our verb kairo, originally, it's a part of charis, originally described the formation of social network and expresses the security that comes from connectedness and diversity. They digress and talk about nuclear fusion. The reason why the sun shines and there are elements other than hydrogen is all about sharing resources and extracting the subsequent surplus, which is the reason why sufficiently compact societies can generate and store wealth. Great idea. In fact, the more diversely interconnected a society is, the more wealth it can release and the brighter its social star shines. Our verb refers to social compaction. It describes the opposite of social scattering, and it goes hand in hand with the adjective agios, which is usually translated as holy, but literally expresses social convergence. This adjective was used substantively in cases where it denoted the holy place or temple. Now, I don't want to go head to head with John Calvin, whose managerial philosophy in being mayor of a city became his undergirding theology of grace. It remains today the cornerstone of Baptist and evangelical churches. Instead, I prefer the work of the Abarim publications in unpacking how those terms evolved and were understood at the time Paul wrote to the Thessalonians, grace to you and peace. The joy we express in God's unmerited gift of mercy and forgiveness towards us is related to that joy which the early farmers and villagers experienced when their labors enabled them to feel secure and diverse and connected. But there's more. Diving deeply into the language of the Bible, we find that the active voice of the verb kairo, from charis, is used in key scriptural passages. And these lead straight away to the idea that the proclamation of the gospel is much more of an insight into how the natural world functions and works, and much less a religious manifesto. This last insight might make John Calvin rise from the grave screaming, "No!" And perhaps we should tackle that next time.